Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's forum event hosted by the Institute of Politics and Public Service at the McCourt School of Public Policy, better known to many of you as GU Politics. My name is Nicholas Nelson. I am a senior in the college studying political economy, and I am proud to be a lifelong resident of the great state of Arizona. When I was just 3 years old, my family moved to the city of Surprise, which was, at the time, mostly dirt patches, cabbage fields, and a variety of plants that would probably poke you if you get a little too close. Over the years, though, I watched the city blossom into a lively community that ultimately became yet another one of Arizona's fantastic places to call home. My experience here at Georgetown University has enabled me to become more actively engaged with the inner workings of the state that raised me. Experience canvassing for primary elections with Georgetown's college Republicans, and conducting legal research for various interest groups in the area opened doors back home, such as a summer internship with my Congresswoman's district office and many different opportunities to work with ongoing campaigns. I am immensely grateful for not only the education that Georgetown has provided me, but also the countless connections and professional pathways that organizations like GU Politics make possible. With November less than 2 months away, we are kicking off our 2022 midterm elections programming with a 2-night event featuring the chairs of the Republican Governors Association and the Democratic Governors Association. Each night, we will take a closer look at some of the many gubernatorial elections happening this year. Moderated by GU Politics Executive Director Mo Elathi, these conversations will also focus on the forces at play in the battle for statehouses and dive deep into some of the most competitive races across the country. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the maximum exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that audience members may not share the same views as the speaker, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event will respect the right of the speaker and the organizer to share their perspectives and ideas, and not cause a disruption to the event's activities. At the end of the event, there will be a Q&A session during which you may engage in dialogue with the speaker. Please be sure to phrase your comments in the form of a question, and in the interest of time, we also ask that each person be concise and ask only one question. Also, please feel free to join this evening's conversation on social media by tagging GU Politics with @GUPolitics. Tonight, we are joined by Governor Doug Ducey, the 23rd governor of Arizona and chairman of the Republican Governors Association. Governor Ducey was elected in 2014 and re-elected in 2018 with more votes than anyone in the state's history. I'm personally proud to say that when I became of voting age in 2018, Governor Ducey's name was the very first that I ever checked on an official ballot. Upon his election, Arizona had a $1 billion deficit and a sluggish economy. Today, Arizona has a record surplus, a balanced budget, and a booming economy. That is no coincidence. Governor Ducey has eliminated overburdensome regulations, fostered the creation of hundreds of thousands of jobs, and reformed taxes every single year he's been in office, including signing the largest income tax cut in state history. Throughout his administration, Governor Ducey has prioritized education. Since he took office, Arizona has invested over $11 billion into K-12 education and brought per-pupil funding to a record high. He has also positioned Arizona as a national leader in school choice and civics education. Even with record investments and historic tax cuts, Governor Ducey has found a way to ensure that Arizona remains insulated from future downturns, adding $1.4 billion to the state's rainy day fund. He is a former businessman and former CEO of Cold Stone Creamery. He has 3 sons, has been married to his wife Angela for 31 years, and resides in Paradise Valley, Arizona. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Mo Elathi of GU Politics and Arizona Governor Doug Ducey.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Hoya Saxa. Nick, thank you so much for the introduction.
Thank you, Nick. Very generous.
With your introduction, that makes 3 Arizonans on stage tonight. As I was talking to the governor about earlier, I grew up in Arizona, in Tucson, and left to come to school at Georgetown as an undergrad. However, I think I'm the only Democrat on the stage tonight. Do you all still have that youth in government program that the YMCA runs, the model legislature? I was a two-term state governor.
Oh, were you
Yeah,
really?
yeah,
Well, that's good.
So
training.
from one two-term
Prepared
governor.
you for this?
Yeah,
gig.
one two-term governor to another. Welcome to Georgetown. And welcome to all of you. As you said in the introduction, this is actually our first big event of the semester, and thought it was a really fitting way to kick off our look at the midterm elections of 2022. And we deliberately wanted to start by looking at the battle for state houses. If you watch cable news, everyone's talking about the House, they're talking about the Senate. But as any one of you that have come into my office hours will tell you, looking for career advice, my first piece of advice is if you want to end up back in DC, get the hell out of DC for a while. Go out into the states, because that's where politics really takes place. That's where public service and governing really takes place. And so over the next two nights, we're going to talk to the two leaders who are tasked with trying to win as many of those state houses as possible for their respective parties about the landscape. And Governor, we're going to start sort of way up here, get a little granular, but then come way back up here. Then we're going to invite the audience to get involved in the conversation, and they always have better questions than I do. But let me start with an incredibly simple, basic question, particularly for those of you that are just starting to learn how Washington works. You're chair of the Republican Governors Association. What does that mean? What is its role in this election?
So let me begin by just saying thank you for the invitation, Mo. It's great to be here at Georgetown, and thank you for coming tonight. The chair of the Republican Governors Association is tasked with electing Republican governors. I mean, that's the business we're in. These are very competitive races that have high stakes in terms of the consequences, and Mo's right. As a governor, you can get a lot done. You are the chief executive officer of your state. You can bring a vision to the state, chart the course, pick the people, and make the decisions. And the RGA, the Republican Governors Association, elects Republican governors when we're successful. We have been the most successful political operation in the nation over the last 2 decades. We have 28 sitting Republican governors today. We're the only majority Republican conference in the country from a national perspective. And I think we've demonstrated as well that we can win in any state in the nation. We have Larry Hogan, who is the governor of Maryland, Charlie Baker, who is the Republican governor of Massachusetts. You have Phil Scott, who is the Republican governor of Bernie Sanders' Vermont. So voters really do pay attention to the governor's race, and they will cross over to pick someone who they think will be the superior leader.
So let's start there with why. What is, and maybe I'll ask the question slightly differently. Why should people elect Republican governors? And specifically, why should young people vote for Republican governors? No secret that
Yes.
the Republican Party has challenges appealing to young voters. Why should young people take a good look at Republican candidates?
And Mo and I were talking about this on the way in. We grew up about the same time, and I wanted to go attend different lectures at the school I attended, and I don't remember being so committed to a party at age 18 or 19. I mean, that's where I developed my values and commitment to the conservative cause. It's different today. I imagine everybody here can identify your party affiliation, and I've noticed that even through the high schools, where if asked that question, I wouldn't have had an answer. So to me, what Republican governors can appeal to young people on is you're going to leave this institution at some time, and I imagine you're going to want to apply your degree and build your career. And I think if you were to look at what is going on in red states, and I think COVID really demonstrated this better than any other example that we've had. If it weren't for Republican governors in this country, the entire country would have been shut down indefinitely. It was Republican governors who balanced lives, or I should say prioritized lives, livelihoods, and individual liberties. And you can see across the state, Americans are voting with their feet. I'll talk a bit about Arizona because it's been run by a conservative Republican governor now for 8 years. And we are one of the fastest growing states in the nation. I think we're number 2, and you can see that net migration in. We've also lowered taxes, so we allow you, when you go out and work hard, to keep more of your own money. And every time we've lowered taxes, we've gotten more taxpayers inside the state. It's allowed us to put real investment into K-12 education, probably the most important task of any governor, because education doesn't happen at the federal level. It happens state by state. So I think all of those things of you to have opportunity, you to be able to pursue your version of the American dream. We believe in freedom and the person, the people, the family, and the organizations come before the government, that your rights come from somewhere other than government. And I think you've seen that really happen over the last 2 years. And then the other thing I'd say that's rather new, but you can also see it red state to blue state, is your personal safety, commitment to security inside a state. Some of these things that are happening in some of the larger big cities around the country, especially in a blue state, is something that's rather new in the last 30 years. When I was very, very young in grade school, crime was a top 3 issue. I don't think it's been a top 10 issue for 30 years. And it's a top issue in nearly every race in the country. And I would lay some of that on some of these defund the police or no bail, no jail type policies that we're seeing happening around the country and in big cities. But that's why I never ask anybody at this stage to change party affiliation. I ask you to vote for the better agenda. And that's the interview I think you should have with whoever is potentially going to be the next leader of your state.
You talked about crime. You've talked a little bit about the economy. Seems like a lot of governors, or a lot of Republican gubernatorial candidates are spending a lot of time talking, specifically when it comes to the economy, about inflation and how their states are dealing with it. What are some of the other key issues that you see? I'll say this. One of the things, when I was a campaign operative for many years, my favorite races to work on were governor's races. Senate races were cool, but it was hard to distinguish a Senate candidate in one state from another state, right? Yes. It was the same issues when you're talking at the federal level, whereas at the state level, every state has its own priorities. So I'd be talking about transportation in one and education in another. But having said that, are there some other themes that you see Republican governors, other issue sets that you see Republican gubernatorial candidates running on across the country?
Mo, what you said about these races is so accurate, because Senate races really are national races now. But governors, like I pointed out, in terms of the blue state governors that have Republicans and have had Republicans now for over 2 terms, these races are differentiated. So I would say there's a playbook for Republican governors, but boy, Charlie Baker's going to run a much different race in Massachusetts to win that race than Doug Ducey's going to run in Arizona or Greg Abbott in Texas. But there are some themes along the way that we think are on the voters' minds, and those are things that you address in a primary and a general. Inflation is definitely one of them, but I would boil it down to something more simple. It's really the cost of everyday life. Just everything is harder for people. And while people are employed, if they want a job, their salary can't keep up with that inflation, 8.3%. And they're having a celebration at the White House tonight for the Inflation Reduction Act, which did not reduce inflation. So I think voters are smart. I think they see those things. The other thing that's unique in this cycle, everyone knows that Arizona is a border state. The border is an issue in the state of Arizona, one that we had largely solved 2 years ago. Today, every state is a border state. The southern border is wide open and unprotected. And I'll give you an example. In 2015, I came into office, and it was President Barack Obama. When there was a border crisis, President Obama deployed the National Guard to the border. Governor Jerry Brown in California deployed his National Guard to the border under both President Obama and President Trump. Today, Joe Biden has not called a crisis at the border. The National Guard that is at the border is being paid by the citizens of Arizona and the citizens of Texas. And what's coming across that border, in addition to the humanitarian crisis that you see, is a real public safety crisis in terms of the fentanyl that is streaming across. And this is being manufactured in other countries and manufactured in South America. You probably, through your extended network or friends or family, know a young person, a high school person or a college person that is OD'd on this fentanyl. This breaks my heart because it's happening across Arizona's southern border. So we have 27 governors today that have signed up to be on the American Governors Border Strike Force. They're sending law enforcement. They're sending National Guard. We're sharing intelligence to fight these drug cartels, which are actually shaping border policy. And President Biden appoints Vice President Harris as the border czar, and she's not even visited our southern border. There's no communication with Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. So I think that this is a real issue. I think that people, whether they want to see more immigration or not, they believe in public safety. They believe that when people come into the country, they should follow some type of process. And I think this is going to be a real issue in November, and maybe then we'll capture the attention of the White House and just ask them to do their job in terms of enforcing the law.
One issue you didn't bring up, I think 6 months ago, when people were handicapping the midterm elections, you kept hearing crime, you kept hearing the economy and the cost of everyday living, you kept hearing immigration and a couple of others. And then when the Supreme Court ruled on Hobbs, overturning Roe v. Wade, and tossed it back to the states to decide, it seemed to scramble the conversation at the very least. And I'm wondering from your perspective how you see that issue playing out in races. Has it shifted the ground underneath some of your candidates?
Well, I want to speak first of my position, because I've been proudly pro-life my entire time in public life. And I think that for the conservative cause, the Supreme Court's decision was a victory and the culmination of 5 decades of work. And it was to get the decision back to the states. Now the people will have some say on this very tough issue, and it's not just left to judges. So the idea, at least the way I understood it, is that it's now to come back to the states and to be decided democratically. And I think you'll see a lot of wrestling around this issue. I think the issues that I'm talking about are more the issues that are on people's minds right now. These are things you deal with every day. You don't necessarily deal with that issue every day, but it is part of the issue set. And I think you'll see the most successful Republican governors putting forward a platform that in no way would harm women or harm women's health, and to decide this democratically.
All right, let's talk about some of the specific states. As you mentioned, you guys have 27 states, right?
There's 36 races across the country this year, so we can talk about whatever state you like.
There are 36 races across the country. Currently, Republicans control 20 of those, and Democrats control 16 of them. One thing I think you and I would probably agree on, despite our partisan differences, is the professional handicappers are saying that there are a couple of current Republican seats that would be considered toss-ups, but no Democratic incumbent seats that would be considered toss-ups. I think we could probably agree that the handicappers don't always see the same stuff that we do when we're living this and breathing it.
I got out of the prediction business in 2016.
Yeah, you and I both. So I'd love to get, again, we can start sort of 20,000 foot and get granular about some of them, but tell me how you see the map playing out, and answer that however you want.
Sure.
But where Republicans may be on offense, where they may be on defense.
So let me give you an overview of the country, just kind of a quick flyover. Like I said, this is the largest map that we've had. It's 36 governor's races, and I will share with you how we prioritize things. We protect our incumbents first. After protecting incumbents, we look to keep our red states red. And then the unique thing about this cycle is how much on offense we are in blue states. States that either had a Democratic governor or have a Democratic governor today. So this is really where the challenge is on how do we and where do we focus our resources. And if you start over in Maine, you have a Democratic governor, and we've got a very strong candidate in Paul LePage. We think that he can win that state house back. You can come down into Connecticut and Rhode Island. Both of those are competitive states that we believe we have a shot in. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin are all on our map. We think today, I can say we are investing for a pickup in Wisconsin with Tim Michaels versus Tony Evers, who replaced Scott Walker. You come down to Kansas. Kansas is traditionally a red state. They have a Democrat now in Laura Kelly. We have the two-term Attorney General there in Derek Schmidt. We feel good about Derek as a candidate, and we think if he can get this race kick-started, he can replace Laura Kelly. And then we're very positive as well on Mark Ronchetti in New Mexico. He's a former television anchorman who's running against Michelle Lujan Grisham in that state. We have an excellent candidate in Joe Lombardo in Nevada. He was the Clark County Sheriff during those mass shootings, and he's running against Steve Sisolak. And we've got an incredible young woman in Oregon named Christine Drazen, who, when she wins that race, will be the first Republican since 1982 in Oregon, and that's another state that we're actively investing in. Now, the states I didn't touch on doesn't mean that we've taken them off the table. I just wanted to give you where kind of the interaction is right now, because I know you're going to have Roy Cooper here tomorrow night.
Yeah. I noticed you didn't mention your state, Arizona.
Well, Because Arizona's a red state, and it's going to stay red.
So you were just going through the
I was going around to the,
Yeah.
those are the pickup opportunities
Okay.
that we have. So we've protected our incumbents, and the RGA did something rather unique. We protected our incumbents. There were forces inside the party that were trying to unseat some of our incumbents. And if you saw Brian Kemp in Georgia, who was really in a crucible of a race with the former president working against him, running against someone who was a United States Senator with 100% name ID and ample resources. The RGA protected Brian Kemp, and he won that race by 50-plus points. Those of you that follow politics closely know that nobody wins a race by 50-plus points. So when we've protected every one of our incumbents, and I believe we'll keep all our red states red, including Arizona. I was going around the country on the blue states we have the opportunities in.
Let's come back to those. Let's start with two red states that a lot of people think will go blue, Maryland and Massachusetts. Both of those are states where there were competitive primaries. Some might say between a more sort of establishment, right? Both of those states who currently have Republican governors have governors that have been successful because they sort of represented the mainstream of the party, and they could identify with people across party lines. It seems like primary voters in those two states decided to go with someone with maybe a more populist edge. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'd reframe the question. I would say those are two blue states with successful Republican governors. I mean, Maryland is not a red state, and either is Massachusetts by any means. Yet Charlie Baker and Larry Hogan are the two most popular governors in the country, and in many ways they just get to stand in the gap and stop any bad idea, and they don't have to get involved in any of the controversial issues. But in this business, candidates matter. And Charlie and Larry and Phil Scott, and I'll give you an example of our most recent success that I think you can have all these theories, but then you need some evidence. And in my business, you are what your record is. And I would point out your neighbor, Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. That's a blue state. That's a state Joe Biden won by 10 points. And here's an outsider and a newcomer with zero name ID running against a quasi-incumbent with 100% name ID, a gentleman who had the job 4 years earlier and certainly is a professional on the political side. And Glenn Youngkin runs on an agenda of what people talk about at the kitchen table, what their kids are experiencing during COVID, and that parents should have some say in what happens inside that school. And he wins that race, and he's off to a fast start. And that was last year's cycle. And the other thing I would point out to you was Jack Ciattarelli in New Jersey. While Jack was not ultimately successful against Phil Murphy, he was winning on election night, and no one saw that coming. That was a real momentum, energy, and intensity, one of the Republican Party coming out, but also the suburban mom, the independent, the housewife who was very angry at what they saw over the Zoom or the internet or the screen during COVID and didn't understand why these states were so shut down and locked down when other parts of the country were able to prioritize and balance both lives and livelihoods.
One more thing on where maybe you guys are defensive, and then we can go back to where you're on offense. People like Hogan, like Baker, like you, may have believed strongly in an ideology, but didn't run as ideologues in your general elections. You ran on very Youngkin ran on very practical proposals and conversations, as you said, talking about the things that matter to people every day, pushing ideology to the side a bit. You look at some states like Pennsylvania and Arizona. You weighed in, as the chair of the RGA, you weighed in that primary a bit.
I weighed in as the governor of Arizona.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair.
Just to differentiate the role.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Where you've got people who are running sort of edgier, more populist campaigns, where some of these candidates are still litigating the 2020 election. And I'm just wondering how you, as the RGA chair, if that impacts your strategy as we approach the general election. You've got all these pickup opportunities, you've got a couple places where you're on defense. Does sort of, when you've got people who are those types of candidates, does it impact how you think about the map in making strategic decisions?
Our policy has been, as an executive committee, unless someone is an incumbent like a Brian Kemp, we let the people decide. Now, I reserve the right to get involved in Arizona because it was my state,
right.
But ultimately it's up to the people, and the people have spoken. The primary is over, and the objective is for the Republican to win, and I think we have a much stronger candidate in Arizona, and you're going to see that happen. But what you touched on, Mo, is different, and it's unique to this election cycle. Traditionally, governors are going to campaign differently than how you see the congressional races and even what some of the Senate races have turned into. But we're a divided nation right now, and it is very tribal, and much of that crept into this cycle. And even with that creeping in, I mean, that is up to the, I've said the candidate matters and the campaign matters. So the campaign was successful in the primary. And to me, the real evidence of was that a good strategy is how does that play in the general? And that's to be determined in 57 days.
I want to touch on a couple more states, and then I've got one big final question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Democrats are very bullish on Georgia, but if you look at the polling, Governor Kemp is outperforming. I find Georgia to be such a fascinating state because you have a very competitive governor's race and Senate race. And voters seem to be splitting their ticket, at least as of today, right? Obviously nothing is done. But Senator Warnock seems to be maintaining a slight edge in the Senate race, but Governor Kemp seems to be maintaining an edge in the governor's race. Curious why you think that might be.
Well, first I want to say I believe Brian Kemp is going to win that race. I don't know if you're a betting man, but we can talk after the forum here. And I want to say with Brian Kemp, and I was out there campaigning with him during the primary, and I think politics are tough in Arizona. I mean, you're in Georgia, you're in the rural South, and you've got the former president coming after the guy. You've got all the situation around COVID, and he's walking into very tough rooms, and he wins that race by 50 points. And what I took away from the days I spent in Georgia is the voters saw the decisions that Brian Kemp made during his 4 years. They saw that he had actually earned and deserved re-election. And while they may like this individual and that individual, they trust Brian Kemp, and they are going to return him to the governor's mansion. And I have a lot of confidence on that. I also would say his opponent, who of course is formidable and was very close in the previous election, and we don't have to get into everything that happened after that election, but I just want to say that you've seen additional individuals get involved in this debate. But Stacey Abrams has not gotten above 45 in any polling since Brian Kemp announced his re-election. And I think there's a lot of momentum there. She's outspending him by a wide margin. And I think it demonstrates that you need more than money to win a race. It is about the record that you have, and that's what Brian Kemp is running on, and that's what I believe he's going to win on.
Another race I just find fascinating this year is Oregon.
Yes.
Right? Which, I mean, we can debate whether or not Virginia is truly a blue state. I've done a lot of Virginia races. I think it's a bluish shade of purple. I think it's a purple state. You cannot confuse Oregon for anything but blue, right?
Yes.
And yet, it seems like there's a real opportunity for the Republicans there. Talk a little bit about what's happening there.
Well, I think you all saw on your television screen what happened in Portland, and it went on month after month, and I think many people were shocked at what they saw, and they know we've had civil unrest before, but to just have no one addressing it. And then Kate Brown is the sitting governor of Oregon. She was probably the most heavy-handed governor in the country on COVID lockdowns, shutting small businesses, shuttering schools, mask mandates, and vaccine mandates. She was very zealous about it. And I think that it's really a textbook case of enough being enough, and a real change election in Oregon of someone who has been in the state legislature. People have been able to go back and look at Christine Drazen's voting record and how she's treated people and how she's worked. And she's coming to this race very much like I would say Glenn Youngkin, except more Oregon specific and talking about things that affect people's lives in Oregon. And I think people are saying it's time for a change. We don't need another revisiting of what we've seen over these years. Oregon's I don't know if you've had the opportunity to visit it. It's just one of the most beautiful states in the country. You've got, of course, the urban life there in places like Portland, but you've got a lot of rural areas as well, and you've got a lot of people that have moved there for a better quality of life. And I think the case that Christine Drazen is going to be able to make is that your quality of life has not improved in the last 8 years, and to give her a chance. And we have some confidence that the voters are going to do that. And it'll be the first time since 1982. So you're right, this is a deep blue Democratic state.
And then on the flip side, we've talked about the Republican seats that may not hold. You'd be hard pressed to find a more purple state than Pennsylvania. And that is a state where the dynamics of that, every race ought to be close. And given the political environment and how rough it is for Democrats, you would think that would be a huge pickup opportunity for Republicans. But Republicans nominated a candidate in Doug Mastriano who has fully embraced that populist agenda on the 2020 election, January 6th. I'm curious whether or not you still see that as truly a pickup opportunity.
We're watching Pennsylvania very closely. Another axiom that we have at the RGA is that we don't fund lost causes and we don't fund landslides. So we're in a relationship with our candidate, but we're saying to the candidates, you have to show us something. You have to demonstrate that you can move numbers, that you can raise resources, and that you get this to the 5-yard line or the 5% line. And that's when the RGA parachutes in and punches the victory in. So Pennsylvania is a place where we think, in terms of the dynamics and the demographics, it is a pickup opportunity, but much of this is on the candidate. So it's something we're watching close. And, you know, you never know in my position, and this is what I've been talking to a lot of our supporters about, is we don't know who this cycle's Charlie Baker is going to be. And the shock the world candidate in 2014 was Larry Hogan. You raise as much money as you possibly can, and Chris Christie was in my role in 2014, and he had spent every single dollar, and then he had a sense in the final week that Larry Hogan had a chance, and he won out on a credit card and borrowed $3 million. And when you take that kind of risk in my position, you better deliver a victory, because people don't want to pay for a race that's done after the cycle is over. And Larry Hogan won that, and like I said, he's been incredibly successful in Maryland. We want to be prepared for those types of situations in the September, October timeframe.
I'm going to ask one more purely political question, then we're going to open it up to the audience. Do we have a mic for the audience? Okay, so we're going to move that mic into the center aisle. So as I ask this question, you should feel free to start lining up. And then I'm going to come out back at the end and close out with a less partisan question. Political, but less partisan. So my last political question is, look, as the chief strategist for Republicans trying to take governor's races, and tomorrow we're going to have your opponent, I'm going to ask you, what should keep Governor Cooper and the DGA up late at night, and what keeps you up late at night?
I think what should keep Governor Cooper and the DGA up at night is Joe Biden and the White House. I think these are failing policies. I think this is a failing president. When Donald Trump left office, inflation was at 1.4%. Today it's at 8.3%, and they've told you the entire time that it's transitory. And I think that Biden's agenda and his results are going to be hung fairly or unfairly around every candidate's neck across the country. And of course, I'm not going to answer the second part of your question.
I had to try.
I'll come back on November 9th.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the questions from the audience. Let's try to cycle through as many as we can. Tell us who you are, your school and year, where you're from, and then try to ask your question succinctly.
Wonderful. Hi, I am Ellie. I am a sophomore in the college. I am from Gilbert, Arizona. So just to set the stage, 2020 was a little bit over a year after my permit test, which I know in Arizona, one of the questions is, what do you do when you're tired and you're driving? And the correct answer is you pull over on the side of the road. But unfortunately in 2020, that's what got James Garcia killed by police officers. 41 people in Arizona were killed in 2021 by police. And even as recently as Saturday, Phoenix PD killed a man who was armed only with a sword in front of his own father. Phoenix police shoot their guns every 5 days, and they are the second deadliest police force in the entire nation. How can you say that crime is less of an issue, and how can these issues need to be and should be de-escalated, especially in these instances where they're very avoidable from being deadly? Is Arizona's executive branch bypassing the judicial system by essentially convicting suspects on the spot?
So first, Aaliyah, I want to say I come from a perspective where I think that if you were building a state budget from scratch, the first line item would be public safety. And I think there's been enough of tearing down of our police officers and the brave men and women who wear a uniform or have a badge. And they are in very difficult and tough situations. So to me, this is part of a quality of life and having peace and security in your own home, in your own city. Now, transitioning to what you're talking about in terms of de-escalation, different training techniques, I think that you can be pro the blue, you can be a law and order type candidate and leader, and you can also see opportunities for reform, some also opportunities to talk about issues like mental health And many of our folks that have addiction or alcoholism or some mental health issues, where they reside today are in many of our state prisons. And I think this is something that governors across the country are looking at as to how to better deal with this. But I think when you conflate other incidents where a police officer should have been accountable or an incident where we don't have the facts yet and there hasn't been the proper investigation, that we start talking past each other. I think living in a neighborhood where it's safe, where people that commit crimes should pay a price, where you don't let violent criminals out on no bail, and that there should be consequences for that. Those are the type of philosophies that I've moved forward in the state of Arizona. And I think what's going on with the Phoenix PD is what's going on in many large cities. There is a rise in crime across these cities. I have charge of the state troopers, and the National Guard. I think you've seen many of these left-leaning city councils have more of these policies that are resulting in rising crime.
Thank you for your response.
Hi, Governor. My name's Joe Maswa. I'm a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service, and I worked in Portland, Maine this summer. So as you know, the National Governors Association retreat was in Portland, and all the governors, or a lot of the governors from around the country came in there. And the purpose of that was to sort of foster a sense of community between the governors and sort of discuss it. Even Governor Cooper came to the seafood restaurant where I worked at and ate dinner there. But my question is, how do you work broadly with the NGA to develop policy solutions that can work for all the states, bipartisanly, and to have that agenda move forward?
Great question, Joe. The NGA is the National Governors Association, and I would say by and large, most governors are collaborative. They communicate with each other, and then we compete. So even though I disagree greatly with probably nearly all of Gavin Newsom's policies, when there's a wildfire in California, I'm on the phone with them. And Arizona firefighters are on their way to Northern California. So I think most governors, you rarely, if ever, see two governors split screen on a cable nightly news show yelling at each other. We stay in our lane. Gavin's been elected to run California, and in my second state of the state, I said I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my partner in growing Arizona's economy, and that was then California Governor Jerry Brown. So I think we can have kind of a good camaraderie, but also point out where we believe we're having success in terms of policies, and I think that might be the only conference across the board where Republicans and Democrats still meet in public and private, and I've certainly gotten value out of it. And I think, Portland, Maine, that's the first time we've ever been to Maine. We had a terrific time and got all over the place. It's really beautiful. But I think that that's going to continue sometime. At some point, this fever has got to break. And I think governors in many ways can be the lead example in how to do it, while at the same time very persuasively advocating for the policies we believe in.
Thank you, Governor, and come back to Maine soon.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a first-year grad student with the McCourt School getting an MPP.
Hey, Alex, can you just get a little bit closer to the mic?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes. I'm actually from Phoenix, Arizona. And I was wondering, so in the wake of the 2020 election and like widespread claims of voter fraud, we've seen a lot of very restrictive voting laws come into effect across the country, including in Arizona, which disproportionately affect low-income communities and communities of color. And so I'm just wondering how you think this is going to impact midterm elections and what responsibility you think elected officials have in making sure that we don't have these types of equity issues in voting and making sure that voting is realistic and accessible for everyone eligible.
Well, Alex, I would ask you to get the facts on what these laws actually say. You take somebody, I mentioned Governor Kemp before, the hit that he took in Georgia for some of the election law reforms that they had. They've never had a larger turnout than they had in the primary for Brian Kemp versus David Perdue and Senator Warnock and Herschel Walker. So many of us believe in election integrity. We think that it should be easy to vote, but hard, if not impossible, to cheat. And Americans agree with this. Americans believe that by 80% that voter ID should be presented when you vote. For some reason, that's become a partisan issue when you use voter ID for so many other things. I believe that if you have mail-in voting to suggest the last 4 digits of a social security number on that is not too much to ask. There's all kinds of safety techniques to do this, and I don't think it disenfranchises anyone. And I think in the Georgia election cycle and this election cycle, you're likely to see more turnout in the comparative cycle 4 years earlier. So for whatever reason, all the things that the progressive left wants to do is to make it more chaotic on election day, which is turned into an election month. I think we should be building up trust in our election system. And the other thing I want to point out, because 2020 has come up several times, that there would have been no transition of power if every single Republican governor did not certify their election. And they did.
Having trust in the electoral system is something I think we all care about. Yet some of the Republican candidates for governor right now are still calling into question the 2020 election. So I guess, what do you say to them? And more importantly to me right now, is there any reason to doubt or not trust the 2022 elections?
Well, Mo, I want to step back a little bit and say that this isn't not a new issue and it's not a 2020 issue. You and I were both in the professional world in 2000 when we had Bush v. Gore.
Yeah.
And that was really where I thought the first real Donnybrook around this happened. And I pointed out what Republican governors did in 2020 in terms of certifying all 27 states and delivering those accurate and audited results to Washington, D.C. But in 2018, in Stacey Abrams' race against Brian Kemp, she called him illegitimate, didn't concede, and accused voter fraud or election integrity. So the primaries are over. I do think there is something, and primaries have always been battles among the parties. I mean, the issues are different. I do think through the general election process, there's something that happens to a candidate if they want to be governor of all the people, and that's traditionally who is selected, where they see that there is a larger responsibility in that role. And when it came to the stress test on the Constitution, on this very heated issue in a very difficult election, every Republican and Democrat rose to the calling, upheld their oath and the Constitution. And I have a lot of confidence that's what's going to happen going forward. There's a lot of discussion about how our constitutional republic is fragile, and I just don't buy it. I think it's pretty resilient, and the Constitution held and the American creed continues. So I have a confidence we will navigate through this, but we are in a very tough time.
All right, thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Good evening, Governor Ducey, and thank you for coming to speak with us today. My name is Catherine Hawes, and I'm from Tucson, Arizona, and I'm a sophomore in the School of Foreign Service.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi. Governor Ducey, following your administration's decision to bus over 1,600 asylum seekers from Arizona across the country to D.C. as a form of protest against Biden's migration policies, do you know whether these asylum seekers are being informed that they are not guaranteed to receive certain basic services like shelter upon arrival to D.C.? And how do you suggest fixing our country's broken asylum system to alleviate the pressure on border communities while also ensuring the protection guaranteed to victims of persecution by the 1951 Refugee Convention?
Thank you, Catherine, and very timely question. I imagine you're aware that we are taking migrants that are flowing across our southern border, and many of them are volunteering. All that are coming to Washington, D.C. have volunteered to take that journey. They're going to go somewhere in the interior, and this is what federal law has allowed on this. Because we can't get a phone call back from Secretary Mayorkas, because we can't get President Biden or Vice President Harris to come visit the border, we've brought the border to them. So what I would say to Mayor Bowser here in Washington, D.C. is welcome to our world. And all of these people that are flowing across the border, all of these dangerous drugs, which are oftentimes separate from the people that are on the humanitarian crisis, are all affecting our country, and this is a federal issue. While Greg Abbott and I have done everything possible that we can within the law, including building our own wall and physical barrier on our southern border, if our entire southern border is not secure, neither is our nation. So this is not an immigration issue. This is a border security issue and a national security issue, and it can be solved. And it was largely solved 2 years ago. It was the best situation that we had seen in 4 decades in the state of Arizona. Today, it's much worse than it ever has been. Once we do that, I think we can have a lot of discussion about immigration reform. I mean, all of you right now, I do think you're in a great position, because if you're graduating, there's a job waiting for you in many places in this country. Anybody that wants to work can find a job. How we've traditionally dealt with these types of situations is with targeted immigration to allow people that want to pursue the American dream and do it legally to be able to do that. Today, there's zero appetite for that. Under the Trump administration, immigration was at an all-time low. It remains at an all-time low in the Biden administration. And in terms of asylum, what we have here in so many cases is the cartels and human traffickers training vulnerable individuals how to answer these questions so they gain entry into the country. That's not asylum.
Thanks.
Thank you for your response.
Hello, Governor Ducey. My name is Tristan Sam.
There we go.
My name is Tristan Sam. I'm a senior in the School of Foreign Service here.
Hi, Tristan.
Hello. I'm from Tuba City, Arizona. I'm Navajo Hopi registered Yavapai Apache.
I love all these Arizonans in
Yes.
the room, Governor. It's great.
And my question is regarding the Native American electorate, given your position as a highly elected political official and the head of the National Republican Governor Association. To me, at least, as a Native American voter, what I've noticed is it's paradoxical given our demographics traits in regards to being usually mostly rural and also having a justified distrust of the federal government. Yet, in the last election, 2020, the majority of Native Americans voted for the Democratic Party. One would think they'd vote for the Republican Party given their program and values of smaller governments and standing up for the rural population. So my question to you is, why do you think the Republican program is not taking hold in the Native American electorate when it's taken hold in other electorates that have the same beliefs and the same living conditions?
Tristan, I think it's a matter of us continuing to work this agenda, getting in sometimes these rooms where it can be uncomfortable. One thing I'm proud of that I was able to do in my re-election, I have been, I believe, as tough as anyone in the country on this border issue. Yet at the same time, I realized that Mexico was our #1 trading partner, had a real relationship with Governor Claudia Pavlovich, who was the female governor of Sonora. And I was able to win re-election in Arizona with 44% of the Hispanic vote against an opponent named David Garcia. So it told me that people will vote for an agenda, that not everyone is going to carve up and be polarized on this. And I think the same thing happened in the African American community nationally, where you saw some record turnout and some of the demographics change. And I think it's a matter of relationship. It's a matter of building trust. And it's a matter of process, because the agenda that the traditional Republican governor has is an opportunity for all agenda. It's not trying to negotiate or pit, one identity group against another. And I think there's work to be done on that for all kinds of reasons. And I know with the 22 tribes in Arizona, with some of the good things we've been able to do together, the reforms and the drought contingency plan, I believe if my successor will continue on that road, that there will be many inroads. One thing I would point out to you, in Arizona is the #1 education choice state in the country. You can take your taxpayer dollars and go wherever you would like to school. It's called Universal Educational Savings Account. We were the first state to pass that. And some of the folks that were first to take advantage of that program were moms on the reservation. The Democrats tried to take that benefit way. We had those moms come to the State of the State in 2020 and you sit in the gallery and on the floor and talk about the situation with their daughters and why these special schools benefited their daughters better than the traditional K-12 district offering. That was a earning of trust. And it's those types of things, helping real people in real situations get the services that they are already paying for their tax dollars, that I think helps shift the vote and earn and gains the trust.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We are coming up on the end of our time, so we're going to take one more from the audience, and then I've got a question I want to ask to close it out. So for the rest of you, I apologize. Find the governor's staff and pepper them with your questions. Right, Jesse? Okay.
Hi, Governor. Thank you for coming to speak to us today. I'm Evie, and I'm a freshman in the college, and I'm not in Arizona, and I'm from New York City. And you said earlier that governors' races are often about candidates' records, but in recent years, we've seen a lot of candidates who have Republican candidates who have no elective experience be nominated for governors' races, like you mentioned Glenn Youngkin and like Mark Ronchetti, and also the candidates in Michigan and Arizona this year. So how does that affect the governor's races in those states? And do you think, is that sort of a deliberate decision by Republican parties to sort of go for candidates with less experience or with different varieties of experience to elective office?
So not necessarily, Evie. I think oftentimes the electorate likes an outsider and a newcomer. I get around a lot of young people that are interested in politics, people that might want to run for governor at some point, and I always ask them to go do something else. You know, go build a business or turn a school around or join the military, and then come and run when you have some subject matter expertise. I'm one that thinks that politics doesn't necessarily make you a better leader. Joe Biden has been in politics his entire adult life since he was 29. And there's all kinds of evidence, and you could probably point this out on both sides. But I do think if you brought up Glenn Youngkin, this is an individual who hired people, made decisions, ran a budget, and had to do it in a way that was profitable to investors. I think that's good training in many ways for the governor's office. So I do think that oftentimes there's another axiom in politics that says friends come and go, but enemies accumulate. When you're that newcomer that's been building a business your entire life or running a school or in the military, and you walk into that room to ask for people's votes, you don't have any enemies in that room. Everybody is curious as to why you made that decision. So I think it's having some subject matter expertise in something other than politics. Just getting elected and reelected is not the skill. The skill is in what happens once you are elected. That's when the record happens, and that's what campaigns are traditionally about the future, and they're to be aspirational. When I ran on this as well, because I saw some of the scores, not only in Arizona, but across the country, that young people just didn't know their civics. Now, that's not true in this room, in a place like this, in Georgetown, but people didn't know who the father of the country was. They didn't know who fought the Civil War or who won it. And the first law that we passed in Arizona was the American Civics Act. It's a 100-question test. You could all take it right after I leave. I imagine you'd score in the high 90s. I think there's a couple pretty tough questions on there. And hopefully you've learned this through your raising, your classroom, and your osmosis. But many kids across the country couldn't get to 50%. And I think once we have that foundational understanding of our civics, our founding documents, our Declaration, our Constitution, and then you can go so much deeper into the Federalist Papers and the decisions that have happened over the last 250 years, we have a much better discussion, a debate, or an argument, whatever you want to call it, and then we can look for solutions that further this project that we're all a part of. And I think that is what has been the focus in Arizona. And that's the great thing. If you run and you win, you can say to your team, this is the first law we want to pass. Now you have to, as you know, you have to pass it through the House and the Senate, and then you get to sign it. But those are the kind of changes. Now, nobody in Arizona, and all of you, did not graduate until you passed the American Civics Act. And we just took the standard on that up even higher. We brought the Sandro Day civic celebration where every class has to demonstrate civics one day a year. So I think to get this more into the discussion rather than to just get on uniforms and argue for past each other will be part of the solution going forward.
Thank you, Governor.
Thanks for the question. And that might be a good segue into my final question. And it's one that I spend a lot of time thinking about and that our institute has been focused on. And that is, how do we work through what appears to be such crippling polarization, right? Like, I'm not Pollyannish. We have always been polarized. The things that Adams and Jefferson said to and about one another when they were running in that very first presidential election was pretty edgy stuff. But it feels worse now. And we've been tracking this issue in some polling. And in our most recent poll, we asked people on a scale of 0 to 100, 0 being no division in the country, 100 being edge of civil war, what do you rate it? And the mean response was like 73, 74. People think we are nearly 3/4 of the way to civil war. Democrat or Republican, you gotta believe that's not a good thing. And so I guess my final question is, diagnose maybe why we are so polarized, why people feel that we are that way, and what can we do, and specifically, what can they do as they step out onto the field of civic engagement to help push through this polarization?
So there's no doubt that we are divided. It's as polarized as I think any time in our adult lifetime, to be certain. It's part of the reason that I talk about civics and the American story. I do think there have been times where we have been more polarized, and certainly during the Civil War was one of them. The late 60s was one of them. And as polarized as we are right now, thank goodness we've not experienced that political assassination or much of the ongoing violence and terrorism that was happening.
But we've come close.
And
right,
you can point to certain events. So how does the fever break, and how has it broken before? I do think right now in many ways, I was 44 the first time I came to Washington, D.C. Just my business career didn't bring me here. I didn't go on an 8th grade trip to this city, and I think it's a very fascinating place. I'm very patriotic, and I love to see the symbols and the monuments and what's happening here. This is to be the cradle of liberty and an example around the world. Yet I think this city is failing in so many ways. I think our Congress has basically washed their hands of the Article I powers that they have. And now we fight every 4 years for who's going to be king, and we pressure them to do executive orders. So it's not working. I wish, and I know there's likely many mixed feelings about the Supreme Court here, but I think the Supreme Court has finally shown up in terms of they are going to live in the spirit of Marbury versus Madison and actually have engagement around judicial review. I'd like to find a Federalist Society for legislators, because I think legislators in this town punt. They don't want to vote. They have let the administrative state grow. They've let the regulators and the cabinet secretaries make these decisions. So the solution, I do think, is right in front of us in the Constitution, in the 9th and 10th Amendment. I think that if you were to push dollars and programs back to the states, that people like Doug Ducey would handle it much differently than Gavin Newsom, but you would also see the laboratory of democracy. And in Arizona, as proud as I am of our record, and it's been conservative from every different angle, 92% of the things that we passed were bipartisan. So I had to work with both sides to get things done, and relationships get pretty threadbare in the 8th year after you've been there, and yet we were able to have our most successful legislative session in that 8th year. And it was building those relationships and doing some of the things that have become a bad word. We would never have had a Constitution if it weren't for some compromises. So to me, that is part of the back and forth. I'm the executive, and you want a legislative branch with leaders, and I've been blessed with people like Speaker of the House Rusty Bowers in Arizona and Senate President Karen Fann, but having relationships with Rebecca Rios and Reginald Boulding, who are the leaders of the Democratic Party. I think that would be a starting point because the stakes are too high right here, and our system was designed to have decisions incredibly important to the family and individual at the school board and local level. And somehow all of these decisions have now fallen into not what's exactly right for that state, but what color is it, red or blue?
Governor, our motto here at the Institute of Politics and Public Service is a good thing, politics can be too. That gets tested very often these days. But I believe that if it's going to be true, it's got to be through dialogue. And so I want to thank you for coming here and engaging with us in that dialogue. You had a lot of people in here who agreed with you, a lot of people in here who definitely did not agree with you, but it was a respectful dialogue, and we are all better for having heard your perspective. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you all for being here. Yeah, thank you.
I'll follow you. These guys know where we're going before I do.